Hey everyone, welcome to session 237 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about TikTok, and while I personally don't use the platform, I'm aware of the considerable influence it has across a wide range of topics. As many listeners can imagine, autism is one of those topics that generates unfathomable amounts of content on the platform. Unlike other forms of medical and scientific dissemination, there are really no barriers to saying whatever one wants, not only on TikTok, but on any other internet-based media platforms, and that includes podcasts, of course. As you might imagine, this brings with it lots of variability in terms of information accuracy. Today's guest, Drs. Elisabeth Sheridan and Giacomo Vivanti, along with their colleagues Diego Aragon Guevara and Grace Castle, took up the challenge of analyzing the accuracy of autism-related content on TikTok. They published their results in a recent issue of the Journal of Autism Developmental Disorders in a paper titled "The Reach and Accuracy of Information on Autism on TikTok." So in this interview, we discuss the audience scope on TikTok. Spoiler alert, it's massive. Talk about why they decide to undertake this study, how they categorize the veracity of the TikTok videos they reviewed, what type of content creators had more or less accurate videos, what were some of the commonalities to the inaccurate videos they found, and lots more. We also spent some time talking about the reaction to this paper, which has been considerable. And along the way, we talk about many links and resources, etc. So if you want to dive deeper into this topic, go to the show notes for this episode. Just go to behavioralobservations.com, and you can just see what we've got there in terms of links. You can get a link to the paper itself there as well. I should also mention that if you go to the website and sign up for the email list, that you'll get these show notes sent directly to your email inbox. So I highly recommend doing that. A lot of listeners enjoy getting a kind of a recap of the episode along with the supporting documentation with each show that's produced. And this episode is brought to you by the Michigan Autism Conference, which is taking place October 11th through 13th in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It's available online as well. You can go to michiganautismconference.org to learn more about it and use the code MAC10, that's MAC and the number 10, to save $10 at checkout. We're also brought to you by the Stone Soup Conference, which is taking place on October 20th. This is an amazing event. It's a totally online event. It's available on demand afterwards. It has a great roster of speakers. It benefits a wonderful cause, and it's all at a really smoking price. So, and it's even more so of a good deal when you use the code podcast at checkout. So if you want to learn more about that, you can just Google Stone Soup Conference. It'll come right up. You can go to the show notes of this episode and find it there as well. And then lastly, Behavior University. Their mission is to provide university quality professional development for the busy behavior analysts. Learn about their CEUs, their webinars, their on-demand trainings, their 8-hour supervision course, RBD training, and lots more over at behavioruniversity.com/observations. All right, that's it for opening remarks. So without any further delay, please enjoy this episode with Elisabeth Sheridan and Giacomo Vivanti.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sicoria.
Drs. Elisabeth Sheridan and Giacomo Vivanti, welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today. You folks came to my attention, I think, through Twitter. Elisabeth, you posted this article or this paper that you guys recently published. It's the reach and accuracy of information on autism on TikTok, and that was published in JAD. And I know we were just talking just a second ago before we hit the record button. The response to it has been crazy, or at least it has been from my perspective. I asked your permission to post some the graph and some other aspects of it on Instagram, and I think it's probably one of the most popular, most commented on, most shared Instagram posts that I've made. And so I feel like you guys have keyed into something really important here, or at least something that people are responding to. I'm really looking forward to getting into the details of this paper. And if folks have not seen the paper, we'll talk a little bit more about what it is and why you did it and things along those lines. Prior to doing that, though, I want folks to know a little bit more about your background. So if each of you could take a minute and just tell us a little bit about yourself. Both of you guys are at Drexel University down in Philadelphia. So tell us a little bit about your background, and we'll get into the paper itself.
Well, I'm going to start. Yeah, okay. My name is Giacomo Vivanti. I'm an associate professor at the A.J. Drexel Autism Institute here at Drexel University in Philadelphia. And I am the leader of the Early Detection and Intervention program. This is a research program. We're trying to understand how we can improve the well-being of young children on the autism spectrum using the best science that we have available for understanding early detection and early intervention programs, how they work, when is it that they work, what works for whom, and so on. I also have an advocacy background as the brother of two young adults on the autism spectrum. And so I'm very interested on how people understand autism in general, because it's something that will touch me personally.
Yeah, and I am Elisabeth Sheridan. I am an associate professor at Drexel as well. I direct our clinical core here at the Autism Institute, which is essentially, Giacomo mentioned his program of research. We have several different programs that cut across the lifespan. So Giacomo leads our early detection and intervention research group. We've got a team that's looking at more transition age youth and young adults. We have a team looking at modifiable factors in autism, some more epidemiological factors, and life course outcomes. So all of the great researchers we're really fortunate to have here at the Autism Institute, anytime their research touches anything related to clinical work, that's where me and my wonderful team, many of whom are BCBAs and very much love this podcast. So they're very excited that Drexel's being represented. I know you had our colleague, Dr. Jessie Watkins Day on your podcast talking about her infant safety sleep not long ago. So we're really happy to be here. And Matt, I think what you said about this paper in particular really resonates with me, as I'm trained as a clinical psychologist. I grew up in a very behaviorally based program. In hindsight, it's funny to think about all the psychologists listening out there, whether or not you sit for the BCBA exam or not. I did not. I was pretty close. I had a couple more courses to get. This was in 2008, I think, where I was at that crossroads. I was at the Marcus Autism Center, Emory, doing some training and got different input from folks about, do you sit for the BCBA? Don't you? So I don't have those letters after my name, but I, from an orientation perspective, am very behaviorally focused. So it's very interesting to me, this phenomena that we touched on that we'll get into this hour with you, because I think it's striking a nerve with folks across disciplines, across behavior analysts, psychologists, pediatricians. I've heard from every area of the field about this feeling that, wow, this is something I've seen clinically and you all put data behind it. So I think that's why it's drawing the attention it has.
I would agree. And I know you guys have been on, again, somewhat of a media tour. So I'm curious to hear what that's been like as well. But let's talk about the paper and what motivated you to look into this? What was, what were you guys seeing in your work, or what were the signals saying, hey, we should expend some time and energy studying this?
Yeah, I'll start. And then Giacomo, if you want to jump in, I think so. We really, to start out on, as you mentioned, the media tour, we've been fortunate to actually have the two students who have been they were the driving force behind why we did this work. So we have two wonderful, at the time, undergraduate students. So Diego Aragon Guevara and Grace Castle are the first and second author on this paper. And I was joking with Giacomo last week and the students when we were talking to another podcast, because I remember the meeting. We have a weekly meeting that Giacomo leads where we have a journal club talking about different papers. And I remember when Diego, the first author, he approached me as we were leaving that journal club and said, is this something you'd be willing to mentor and contribute to? We really want to look at the hashtag autism TikTok. kind of trend and to what extent it's accurate or overgeneralized or inaccurate. And my first thought was, ooh, that sounds complicated. And I wasn't so sure. And Giacomo actually was the one who jumped in and said, yes, let's look at this empirically. So I joined after Giacomo really started these students off. And I'm glad we did. I think it's complicated and nuanced. But they really did drive this idea for us. They did the coding. We mentored them along the way. But Giacomo, I'm curious kind of your perspective in getting that idea started with them.
Yeah, I became very interested, even if I'm not a TikTok user, when I realized that there are more than 1 billion users on TikTok. And then I learned that autism is in the top 10 more researched hashtag, most viewed health-related hashtags on TikTok. So it was clear to me that this is something incredibly influential. It can change the way people understand what we're talking about when we're talking about autism, and it can change the way caregivers, for example, who come to us to discuss early intervention options might interpret what we're saying or be ready or not interested in engaging in specific interventions. Now, when I started looking into it with our students, what I was very impressed by is that a lot of what is posted there has some sort of anti-establishment content in which the scientific community or the healthcare professional community, or generally speaking, those who do our jobs, academics or scientists or clinicians, are somewhat challenged by someone who says, what they told you is wrong. This is the truth. And as soon as I started seeing that kind of content, I thought this is important. We need to study this, and we can study this in an objective way, like everything else we study.
Are you looking to expand your knowledge, connect with a like-minded community, and accrue those CEUs you've been meaning to catch up on? Well, look no further. Mark your calendars for the 11th Annual Michigan Autism Conference, October 11th through 13th, 2023, in downtown Kalamazoo, Michigan, where we will be planting seeds of change for tomorrow's growth. Our 2023 speaker lineup features keynote speakers Shala Alai Rosales, Rita Gardner, Darnell Latal, John McCacken, Trina Spencer, and Jason Travers, along with over 50 breakout sessions as well. We even have pre-conference workshops and a free kickoff event prior to the main conference. CEU packages are available for BCBAs, social workers, educators, and beyond. Be sure to save your spot as early registration discounts end August 18th, 2023. Interested in learning more? Check us out at MichiganAutismConference.org to see the 2023 lineup, past conference archives, and much more. We're still accepting caregiver scholarship applications and have virtual ticket options available for those who are interested. And as an exclusive for Behavioral Observations listeners, use code MAC10, that's MAC, the number 10, for $10 off your conference registration. We can't wait for you to join us. And I just want to observe for a moment that the contribution of the individuals you're mentoring, those were undergraduates. That's it's just such an amazing opportunity for them. I just can't imagine being in their shoes and having the opportunity to add to the literature in such a unique way, and to have what might be, I don't know if it's their first publication or not, but I'm guessing if it's not the first one, it's probably the first few. Again, catch on like wildfire here. I'm probably gonna say that term a number of times here. So again, so it's just perhaps speaks to the relevance of it. And I also think that idea of the anti-establishment, hey, you're going to get this, the real story here, can be very alluring. There's probably lots of things I would imagine that I'm not a TikTok user, but I'm no stranger to Instagram Reels, unfortunately, so I can get lost in those if I'm not careful. And it's one of those things where you can, those things are just inherently reinforcing if they strike on a topic that is of interest to you. So All right. So back to the, I guess, the paper itself. So you had the motivation, the idea. You certainly had the personnel resources and a couple of motivated undergraduates to do this, and certainly they had the mentoring and support from you two. Tell us a little bit about the methodology that you used. So it sounds like with 1 billion users and with autism being in the top 10 most searched hashtag for healthcare, it's probably how did you narrow things down to have a manageable data set to examine here?
Yeah, that was complicated because TikTok, like any other social media, they don't necessarily tell you their algorithm for what shows up on your device. So whatever they were seeing on their TikTok account, our undergrad students, that would have been biased by their own history of searching and all of that. So we decided to create a new account and to see what comes up. What are the first videos that come up? And it seems like it maps on the ones that have most views and more likes, basically. So that's what we did. We queried the autism hashtag, and then we started looking at videos that were in English. We excluded videos that were not related to autism. We excluded duplicate videos, and in the end, we had 365 eligible videos. So at that point, we decided to operate a categorization between two types of videos, depending on the intent of the videos. So we had videos that we classified as personal experience videos. And those are videos that do talk about an individual who has a diagnosis of autism, or they are somewhat related to autism, but they don't talk about autism in general. So, for example, videos of an autistic person who wants to report about their experience going to Disney World, for example. That is personal experience. There are no claims about how to diagnose autism, about how to treat autism. You want to share your own story. And those videos, we did not examine or fact check for the purpose of this research. They're not right or wrong. They're your personal experience. They're anecdotal, stories about something you experienced. But we did identify 133 videos in the most viewed, that did include statements related to autism in general, what causes it, how it should be diagnosed, how it should be treated. And for those videos, we started a process of fact-checking. And we basically categorized those videos in 3 categories. And we had 2 independent coders who were classifying those videos according to those categories. The first one will be whether the video included some accurate information that was aligned with current knowledge that we have. For example, many individuals on the autism spectrum benefit from alternative augmentative communication. That will be an accurate statement. And then we looked at inaccurate statements. And that will be a video that is that's saying, for example, medical marijuana can cure autism. So it had to be blatantly inaccurate for us to put that code of inaccuracy. If you see some children on the autism spectrum might benefit from medical marijuana, we will give them the benefit of the doubt and do not consider that inaccurate. If you say some might, anything that is stated in a way that is that does not make a conclusive statement will be not considered inaccurate. So we were extremely conservative. And then we had information that we classified as being overgeneralized. And so that is the overgeneralization code is when we hear something like autistic children hate to play with sand, or autistic adults never want to be hugged. Something that describes some behaviors that might be true for some individuals, but definitely cannot be generalized for the entire autism spectrum. And so when we did that, at that point, we looked at whether the two independent coders agreed. And they did 80% of the time on whether a video was in one of those three categories. And then we resolved the disagreement with a third coder, which was myself and Elisabeth, again, adopting the most possibly conservative criteria.
Hey everyone, I want to take another quick break here and tell you about this year's Stone Soup Conference. Let's talk about the basics first. It's going down on October 20th, but it's available on demand afterwards, and it is available online exclusively. When you sign up, you get 8.5 CEUs. The retail price is $89.99, but honestly, who wants to pay retail? When you use the promo code podcast, you'll save $20 on your registration, and that results in about $8.25 per CEU, which I honestly challenge you to find a deal as good as that. Let's talk real quick about some of the topics that will be covered. There'll be talks about peak and aim. There'll be talks about cultural responsiveness and applied behavior analysis, the relevance of the basic science behavior analytic literature, mental illness, tough talks for overcoming performance challenges, teaching employees complex professional skills. I'm really looking forward to that one. And building effective social chains for individuals with autism spectrum disorders. You can learn a lot more about not only these topics, but who will be presenting on them. And if you just go to the link in the show notes for this episode and click on the Stone Soup Conference link, you can just Google Stone Soup Conference if you want to, and find out more information there. I hope to see you on October 20th. Let's get back to the rest of this conversation. Did the students doing the coding, I mean, I'm imagining that they perhaps had to look up some things. Like, I can imagine there's quite a variability in claims that are out there, and so did they have to consult like PubMed or Google Scholar or something like that? If someone said, vitamin D supplementation, I'm making something up right now. I don't believe this is not a claim, folks, just to be clear. But, so did they spend a lot of time in research databases trying to sort out what is and isn't, an accurate claim?
So they did use Google Scholar and PubMed, and they went through the literature that was part of their training. Some of the content in the first few seconds, you see a teenager telling you, with this simple test, you're going to learn if you are autistic. It's only 3 questions. So by then, you don't need to spend a lot of time doing searches, but sometimes it can be more subtle, such as the medical marijuana example, where you have to think about targets, what exactly mean when they say this can be beneficial, and are they talking about some individuals, and so on. So it can be blatant misinformation that it's very easy to identify by anybody. Someone's trying to sell you something, for example. In that case, it's pretty clear, but it can be subtle, and that requires the tools of scientific research, understanding sources, looking at evidence.
And Matt, I'll just jump in quickly, because I think another important piece that we failed to mention about these wonderful social media savvy undergraduate students is that both of them spent time in our clinic doing what's called a co-op placement. So when they were juniors and seniors, I think respectively, they would come, and I think both of them did multiple placements with us, actually. So they had between 3 and 6 months shadowing in our diagnostic assessment and intervention clinics. So actually seeing how do we do evidence-based care for folks with autism, mostly in the context of research studies. But so they know what something like an autism diagnostic observation schedule, or ADOS, for example, which is talked about quite a bit on TikTok, and some of the kind of standard procedures that are related to both evidence-based care and assessment. So I think that is a huge piece of this, because these were not two green undergraduate students just learned about autism. They had experience in the trenches, watching families, watching really skilled clinicians for many months before. That's part of what gave them the idea for this project. So I do think that matters in the context of their knowledge base coming into the project.
Right. So they weren't undergrads picked off the street and said, "Here, figure this out with, and here's a computer and access to Google." So that's a very good point. And you said they were co-op students. So for those who might not, so is Drexel a co-op institution? Can you talk about that real quick, just for folks who might not understand that model?
Sure. Yeah. So I moved to Drexel in the fall of 2020, and I personally had never heard of a co-op model. So I appreciate those who haven't. Essentially, it's giving the whole university, from an undergraduate perspective, it gives these undergraduate students an opportunity to get real world work experience while they're in school as an undergrad. So they are coming to us and they are with us. Our current co-op actually just left my office, and she, is here every day, and she's doing a variety of different things. It's essentially a work study, but it really is giving them this real world experience, ideally in an area they're hoping to go into. So Diego's a great example of a co-op. He was with us his senior year as his final year at Drexel, when he was applying to go into PhD programs in clinical psychology. And so he was able, this paper was accepted for publication after he was already admitted into Binghamton University's clinical psychology PhD program. So we were laughing with him last week. Part of why it's just Giacomo and I, both Grace and Diego. Grace is in a master's in public health program now here at Drexel. So I think the co-op model is a great way to get students these real world experiences that can lead to wonderful opportunities like graduate programs like both of them have pursued.
Did they have to, and by extension, you two have to discern between maybe interventions that are maybe hotly contested within the research literature? In other words, did you come across claims that even scientists don't necessarily agree on? Whether I'm talking maybe different speech, maybe different communication modalities or something along those lines. I'm thinking, again, I'm pulling this out of thin air, like sign versus selection based communication supports, or other different types of behavioral assessments, different types of functional analysis methodologies. Those things are always subjects of discussion and debate, and at least in the behavior analytic literature. Did you come across any of those? Like, ooh, I don't know about this, and maybe or anything like that?
TikTok videos don't have that level of sophistication.
I figured I didn't want to be uncharitable, but I just had to ask.
I would say the bar was much lower. It's the conversation. It can be about, generally speaking, whether interventions and supports are helpful or not, and the fact that those that come from individuals who own the power by virtue of being in academic institutions, they are to be trusted or not to be trusted. It's that kind of conversation more than the sort of conversations that we have within the scientific establishment or the scientific community, where we are considering the subtleties of merits of different interventions for different people. And some are not about intervention. A lot, I will say, we're not at all about the specifics of intervention, but more about the experience of having autism as an identity or autism as a diagnosis.
I see. All right. I appreciate that clarification. I just, whenever someone says fact check, sometimes, there is a teeny tiny part of the conspiracy theorist, I guess, that creeps up and says, like trying to fact check and I'm using air quotes here that no one else can see but you guys, but the science, if you will, is are things that a lot of times scientists have a hard time doing and agreeing on certain principles and things along those lines. So all right, so again, I don't want to belabor the point, but it sounds like you guys had a methodology for sorting through these videos and things like that. So I know the IOA data was about 80%. It sounds like. So what were those edge cases like? What are the things that you two had to come in and kind of give a second look at? Were there any commonalities to those that you recall?
Well, one example is mentioned in the paper. It is the use of cannabis products as something that can be potentially beneficial for some individuals. And then there was other content was related to, for example, diagnostic or evaluation or assessment tests that can be helpful or not helpful, or appropriate or not appropriate. In that case, what we were looking at is, again, how do you phrase things? A lot of that was about whether the way you phrase things implies some kind of truth about autism in general, or you're talking about your experience. So, one can upload a video and say, I had a terrible experience with a BCBA. That can be absolutely true. Just like I can say I had a terrible experience with my teacher in elementary school. I will not be able to fact check it. It's a personal experience. And to distinguish that from a video where we're saying don't trust anybody who has a BCBA because their goal is to make money out of blah, 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 blah. So those differences that, again, I don't want to go into the specific of the videos, but it's often bringing up a theme that can be nuanced. And then depending on how you phrase it, ultimately identifying whether this is a statement about things that you should do in general for the autism population, or whether this is a statement that you framed as something that you experienced, in which case it's fine.
Yeah, and Matt, I just want to add to that, because I actually think overwhelmingly the response on social media, the irony of sharing this paper about social media on social media and then seeing the response is not lost on me. But we'll talk more about that, I think, in a little bit. I just want to highlight, though, an autistic researcher, I believe, was the one who commented on the Twitter article, the abstract that I shared there, and made a really good point that I just want to highlight, because I think what Giacomo just said drives home the idea that we were really careful and thoughtful about how we coded this, and the idea that we really wanted tight operational definitions around someone's personal experience and leaving that out. So we're not trying to have any value-based judgment on, is your personal experience accurate, inaccurate, or overgeneralized? That's not our place. That's not the point of this paper, right? So we really wanted to try to have tight boundaries around what is misinformation. And I think that's hard. And, some of the feedback was, I can do air quotes as well, like the quote based on their consistency with existing scientific knowledge. And someone commenting, that only goes so far to represent lived experiences. And I appreciate that. And I think we'll get into talking a little bit more about the value of social media more broadly for folks sharing their lived experiences and finding community across all diagnoses, not just autism. It's a really meaningful and powerful way that social media platforms can be used. I just want to clarify that our intention with this study was not to discredit that at all. We're trying to really get at the reason when families and patients have come to me over the years and said, does X, Y, or Z harm my child like this influencer said? It's like, wait a minute, let's compare that with the evidence base that we have, knowing that our evidence base is not perfect, right? We're doing the best we can to try to have some really tight operational definitions on things that can be nebulous.
Thank you. It's really hard, because I think that someone sharing their experience can have the perhaps, and I'm not saying people shouldn't do this. It's probably more for the consumer of the media to look out for, or be aware of. But to Giacomo, to your example of someone saying, I had this terrible experience with a BCBA. This BCBA treated me, really badly. I'm not denying that doesn't happen. So I just want to be very clear. But the implication of that is the unstated the implication of that could be that might not be the content creator's intent, but the implication of that could be like, don't trust BCBAs, don't do ABA, or don't acquire behavior analytic services for your child if they have autism or what have you. And so I think, again, I'm just making that observation here to underscore what seems to me that the very conservative nature in which you guys coded these videos. So, and I think we've perhaps maybe teased the audience a bit here. So, what in terms of sorting out what was and wasn't factual and whatnot. So we have the idea of how you set the parameters and how things fell into what category. And so what did you find as a result of all this when you went through these 130 odd videos?
Well, out of those 133 videos, only 27% were classified as accurate. The other ones were either inaccurate, and that was 41%, or overgeneralization, and that was 32%. The important, I think, finding is that the inaccurate or overgeneralized videos get the same, more or less, amount of views and likes of the accurate videos. So engagement with reliable and unreliable sources is similar. And that makes things complicated, because you see that now we have a platform where accurate and inaccurate information is perceived with the same level of authority, is perceived as seriously. So the other thing that we looked at is whether there was any difference associated with the type of creator. Who is it that is uploading and creating these videos? And we did find that the videos uploaded by healthcare professionals tended to be more accurate, although those were really a minority of the videos that we found in the top 133. So healthcare professionals or scientists might have content that can end up in the top 100, and they can use that platform to convey accurate content, but they don't do that very frequently. Or if they do, it doesn't end up in that top 100 plus most viewed and more liked videos. So again, you see the potential there as well as the problems.
Hey everyone, this is the last break of this episode, and I want to talk to you about Behavior University and their upcoming webinars. I'm looking at one that's happening on September 20th. It's Introduction to Restorative Practices in Schools. On October 3rd, Serving the Deaf and Hard of Hearing and the ASD Community, an Introduction for Behavior Analysts. And on October 18th, Breaking the Spell, Recognizing and Responding to Spelling to Communicate. And that's with former guest Jason Travers. That one's definitely going to be a good one. I'm certainly tuning into that. Now, as I mentioned in the last episode, these webinars sell out. So if any of these strike your interest, you're going to want to go to behavioruniversity.com and sign up for them right away. And when you do sign up, save a few bucks in the process. Use that promo code. It's Observations. So if you want to learn more about how to save on all your Behavior University purchases, just go to behavioruniversity.com/observations. All right, let's hear the rest of this conversation. Can you give an example of some of the healthcare providers that are posting on TikTok? What fields are they coming from? At least as it relates to this sample.
So this will be, for what I can remember, this will be individuals who are in our field doing maybe diagnostic or intervention work, who are in the demographics that is a little more similar to the demographics of the TikTok users. In other words, someone who's younger than me and understands that you can convey content in a way that is different from a boring peer-reviewed paper, and come across as someone you might be interested in engaging with if you are a TikTok user.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Matt, I think as a child psychologist by training, I have a lot of colleagues and cohort mates from graduate school who have gone in different ways into the social media space of quote unquote influencing, in the expertise they have. And I think to Giacomo's point, from what I've seen, I personally don't use TikTok. I don't have the app. I was able to see the videos via our wonderful students. My nieces and nephews have stolen their phones sometimes and just checked the hashtag autism out of curiosity. But this whole process doing this paper has made me kind of rethink the idea that maybe I do need to have TikTok. Maybe all of us as different, psychologists, pediatricians, behavior analysts, whomever we are in the healthcare space, if all of this misinformation is out there, all of these platforms, first of all, we have to acknowledge Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok are really meant for entertainment. I think LinkedIn is a little more professional, but generally speaking, most folks are going to those platforms. I personally use an Instagram and Facebook account for my family's vacations, pictures of nieces, nephews, Broadway, things I love, not my job. Like I've posted more about this paper and all my friends are like, you're talking about your job on your social media, because it's just so interesting to me that this has gotten the attention it has. But all of that to say, I think we need to think together and carefully as a field about how we're disseminating our information. Because to Giacomo's point, we're so used to peer-reviewed journals that can take a year. So this paper is a great example. This idea happened last July, and these students moved quickly. I mean, from a qualitative coding perspective, they got this done in a couple of months. We were getting drafts ready this spring, and it was accepted pretty quickly by JAD, but that's not the case always. And it still took a year, right? So I think we need to think about, I could pick up my phone and do a reel or however TikTok works, talking about something today that could be spread and shared and liked, etc. So I personally don't want to do that, honestly. I think it opens up a lot of complexities as a healthcare provider. And yet I know there are some really good pediatricians, physicians more broadly, behavior analysts, and psychologists out there that make this part of their job. They are sharing science in a very relatable. I actually know Kara Goodwin she has an Instagram account called The Parenting Translator, I believe, where she takes these research articles and digests them and breaks them down, not only in the post, but visually. So she's taking a complicated paper, does timeout work or not? The most recent paper on that. And she's breaking it down for parents who are following her that have kids that should they be using timeout or shouldn't they, right? Like that's a good example of some of these ways we could be using social media that I personally don't right now.
So many directions we can go in. I'm trying to figure out which way. Let's talk. So, I guess just to maybe make sure I'm on the same page with you. So, it sounds to me like with the production of this paper, you encountered out of all the the metaphorical traffic lights, they were pretty much all green, and yet it still took a year to get this into print. So I just kind of perhaps want to underscore the delay in getting information out there, or at least producing the scholarship and then publishing it. So I just think that's noteworthy, and I certainly have friends in the academy who have papers that have languished for years that are waiting to see the light of day. So again, I think that's noteworthy. So I was going to ask what the review process was like, but it sounds like that was pretty, that seemed relatively smooth. So I guess I'll take the question in a different direction, and that it at least on my feed, and perhaps my audience is probably biased towards wanting a more evidence-based information media supply out there, right? So I think the reception to that has been, at least from what I've seen, has been really positive. I did see a few negative responses as well, though, and I'm wondering if that's something that you folks have encountered too. To paraphrase, some of the concerns have kind of revolved around the idea of kind of information gatekeeping and perhaps shutting out the voices of what you were talking about lived experience just a few minutes ago, and so do you guys want to talk a little bit about that? I don't know if that's something that you guys have encountered as well.
Yeah, that was a concern from the very beginning. I thought that this was going to be a difficult territory to navigate. And indeed, when we first submitted the paper, it was rejected by an editor who said, you cannot really fact check content on TikTok because TikTok is not designed to provide all the information that is needed to make that determination. And my response to that is that if we accept the notion that content cannot be fact checked on social media, then everything we lose basically the ability to distinguish facts and opinions. And I still think that there is enough danger from people going, uploading videos where they say that vaccines cause autism, or they say that this is going to cure autism, and there's a link to my product, my biological, dietary, whatever, something that is dangerous to people's health, that is worth going into this problematic territory and do fact checking when claims are made about autism. Now, it's very important that we do not judge a person who wants to share their experience on TikTok as someone who is trying to deceive us necessarily, right? There is that. The internet is used for that reason, but in many cases, the videos that we did not categorize because they were personal experiences were actually providing very helpful information about one particular person's experience. For example, caregiver of a young autistic girl who talks about their experience at the hair salon. It's interesting. You can learn about that. You don't learn about autism. Okay. You don't learn about what is a diagnostic tool with sound psychometric properties. You learn about that particular situation, that particular person, and that can help you. It's a different kind of knowledge, though. As long as we understand that knowledge about lived experiences is important, it should not be met with contempt. And I will add that even knowledge, even videos that display anti-establishment sentiments are important to learn about. It is important to learn about that sentiment as well. We can be perceived as displaying power or displaying some kind of, gatekeeping attitude and wanting to silence voices because sometimes we fail to really explain what is the scientific process that lead us to come with to have certain conclusions or certain inferences is. And in a sense, to be a scientist is to be anti-establishment. We are the devil's advocates. We are, perpetually devil's advocate. We take a statement, and before we make any inference on whether that statement is true or not, we do a lot of work, and in the end, we usually have a conclusion that is very temporary, that is very, related based on what we currently know, with the understanding that this might change as evidence accumulates. So we come from the same place of wanting to question what people say if there are no data, and use data and use the tools of scientific research to get closer to facts and truth. So that spirit can be healthy to a certain degree. It is not healthy if it's used then as a way to create mistrust against anybody who has a degree, against anybody who is in a position of wanting to facilitate the well-being of children and adults on the autism spectrum, and wants to engage in conversations that are based on facts and not just on opinions.
Yeah, and Matt, I think Giacomo, I agree with everything he just said, and I just want to underscore, I think, a really important point as scientists and clinicians, that we need to know what's being said, good, bad, and otherwise, about our field. And so for me, I actually, the first time the students brought the data, I said, okay, pull out your phones. I want to watch these videos with you, because I needed to actually, they had the themes like lovely. It was a very nice Excel sheet summarizing everything they coded, but I wanted to kind of feel what these folks were actually saying, since I don't have the app. And I was really struck by, I honestly think some of the folks that were posting, and I don't know, as we mentioned earlier, they did code whether or not it was an autistic creator, so someone who was speaking from their lived experience of being on the spectrum. But we also had a lot of not healthcare providers, not autistic creators, just people picking up their phone and talking about autism that are not saying, at least in the video or in their profile, that they have any tie personally, right? So that's just an interesting thing to think about for a second. And I think we have to put that in the context of what social media is in our culture, and the idea that things that are popular or flashy or that are going to get more likes and clicks content-wise can drive creators. So I think I honestly was looking for the anti-establishment ones talking about, I do a lot of intervention, but even more assessment work and training on evidence-based tools in autism. So I was like, ooh, who's talking about the ADOS, good, bad, or otherwise? And there were a lot of videos out there, particularly by adults, kind of trashing our tools and trashing our process, or saying negative things about those healthcare providers, quote unquote, gatekeeping diagnoses. And I think that's something we have to think about. And it's something I talk about all the time with my colleagues around the country and the world that train in diagnostic assessment, because our job, we live in a land of medical model autism spectrum disorder. The word disorder is part of the diagnosis. So in order to get a diagnosis in my clinic or anyone else's, you need to meet either the DSM or the ICD-10 criteria for autism. That said, a lot of creators out there that we are listening to and that we need to be having at the table with us in these conversations are sharing parts of their identity as autistic human beings that they don't want pathologized, or that they don't like talking about in the context of our medical model. So I'm very careful anytime an adult engages with me, or even with trainees, to describe our job as healthcare providers. If you come to our clinic, we'll give you a medical diagnosis of autism, or we won't. But I have a lot of folks that use social media or talk to me about identifying as being autistic, or saying they think they're autistic based on what they saw. And I'm not going to tell them one way or the other that yes, you are, or no, you're not. That's not something I'm trying to gatekeep. Honestly, I think the power of social media to help folks find their people or to identify in something can be really powerful. But I want to draw that very clear distinction between, I think some of the anti-establishment videos, at least that I watched through the course of this paper, were coming from a place of folks saying, we as psychologists or other diagnosticians don't want to give out the diagnosis. And the reality is we follow the procedures and protocols under this medical model that we know is limited in some ways.
Yeah, those are excellent points. Thank you for elaborating. I have just a couple more questions here for you. What and some of this we might have already answered in conversation, but just in case, I don't want to leave anything on the table here. Are there through viewing all these, and maybe this would be a conversation more appropriate for your co-authors here, but are there any general things that you guys have abstracted from this process to help people, figure out, how to determine misinformation from accurate information? I know it seems like some of them might be kind of common sense in terms of, like, I'm just hearkening back to answer these 3 questions to tell if you're autistic. That's, perhaps can be dismissed with, very, very little fact checking. But, I guess the question, I suppose, revolves around, how can people be more conscious consumers of this content that just seems to be everywhere?
Well, there's some red flags that are easy to spot. One is someone who's trying to sell you some products, and another one is the sort of conspiracy theory language. Everything that they told you is wrong. I'm going to tell you the truth right now. Those are sort of things that should that probably are also the reason why they get a lot of views and likes, but they're generally speaking some kind of red flags. It's important, though, to understand that in addition to this sort of blatant misinformation, these videos can bias the general public's views on autism more subtly by providing more content on certain experiences, certain populations, certain subgroups within the autism spectrum compared to others. So, and one example is the underrepresentation of videos related to those who require more intensive services, more intensive supports, and that can lead to less awareness of their experience. And that can affect advocacy efforts and service provision for these individuals and for their families. So there are very direct ways you can be biased. Like someone is telling you everything that you knew is wrong. I'm telling you what you have to do now. Click here, buy this product. And I guess a lot of people can tell that this is suspicious, to say the least. Well, other ways are more subtle, such as always seeing the same narratives, but those narratives only talking about a certain subgroup within the autism spectrum. And then after a while, you might have opinions about the scale, for example, of services and supports that are needed for someone on the autism spectrum that are biased by what you saw in those videos, which might not be the reality that we tend to be familiar with. Individuals who do need, for example, 24/7 services and supports.
So just to kind of, I'm sorry, I want to make sure I understand you correctly here. So what you're saying is that if there's an overrepresentation of folks who are very capable in their communication skills, et cetera, and they're that people will have an inaccurate opinion and perhaps tend to think that the proportion of individuals who are more severely impacted by autism, is less than what it is, and therefore might paint with a broad brush, saying, autistic folks need a lot less intervention or need different types of intervention. That's that is not as again, I just keep coming back to the word intense. That might be represented in a true analysis of where people fall in terms of the level of severity. Is that what you're saying? Elisabeth, I cut you off. I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
That's okay. Actually, you summarized it probably more succinctly than I was going to, Matt. I just wanted to underscore what Giacomo said there, because I think as a clinician, I have done feedbacks with families and individuals, adolescents, adults that range the entirety of the spectrum, not only in their autism symptoms, but in their intellectual and language abilities. And I just think it's really important to remember we're only seeing a subset of those lived experiences. And I think we do hear from a lot of parents or caregivers or loved ones of folks who are the caretakers of individuals who require the 24/7 supports and who, can never leave their loved one alone at their house and have to lock the doors. And I know a lot of the experts you have on your show, Matt, are the ones caring for the folks who have the most severe behaviors, and trying to figure out how they can have their best optimized quality of life and live the best life they can. So I think a lot about that. And I think the takeaway, what you asked about kind of all these videos, what have we learned and what are the red flags, for example, anyone listening or kind of dabbling in this hashtag autism, we just I would argue that, yes, TikTok and hashtag autism, which was the focus of this paper, all the things Giacomo said about kind of the buyer beware. Someone's trying to sell you something. They're trying to kind of prey on vulnerable folks for a quote unquote cure, or to, come to my service X and I will alleviate all of your suffering or help you in all the ways. We know autism is just so complicated. And if it were that simple, we'd be out of jobs, which would be wonderful. So I've been telling families for almost 2 decades now doing this work that regardless of where something's posted, be it a website, TikTok, another social media outlet,
a podcast.
A podcast. Yeah. Any of these quote unquote influencers, like, we live in an era where unfortunately there are people out there to make money and to generate business, sometimes preying on very vulnerable or folks that are willing to do anything. I've had some families say they're going to fly to South America or Europe or other countries for these things that are just not evidence-based at all, but they're grasping at straws and willing to pay a lot of money for things that are not evidence-based to try to help their loved one. And, Giacomo mentioned his lived experience. I have some family members and best friends' kids on the spectrum, and autism is not always a gift. It is, a lot of people, some of my favorite humans are autistic, and some of the best parts about them, it's because of their autism, but autism is not always a gift. And I work with lots of parents who have kids with self-injurious behaviors, and their kids are suffering. And so I think, to alleviate that suffering, sometimes families will do anything they can, but we just need to be consumers. Social media is such a powerful tool, but I don't think we yet understand the effect it's having, that can sometimes be a negative effect, unfortunately.
Those are important points. I want to give you guys an opportunity to mention anything about the paper that I perhaps haven't thought to ask, and also let you close out with what advice you might have for the newly minted BCBA. I know you guys aren't BCBAs, but you're closely aligned to what we do as with many of the audience members. So I'll leave it to you two to wrap up.
Okay, I'll go first. I wrote down something, since Diego and Grace can't be here. We met last week and talked about the paper. Diego made a really important point that I want to share. At the time when they queried hashtag autism in July of 2022, there were 11.5 billion views of that hashtag. He queried it again last Monday morning, and there were 27 billion views of hashtag autism. So it has more than doubled in the volume and the views. And I just think that, just sit with that for a second, because this paper, I think partly why it's gotten so much attention is, we're trying to understand from an analytic perspective what all of that means from a content analysis perspective. But we're really only scratching the surface. And if and when you read the paper, in the discussion we talk about, of the views that we analyze, those 133 informational videos, only about 200 million of them were the ones that we're talking about, which is 1.7% of all of the views, right? So if we break that down, we're really talking about this small subset. And this was a student-driven project. We did not have funding for this paper. This was not a grant. I think it speaks, though, from a population health and public health perspective, that we probably need to have funded research that can really better understand beyond just the cross-sectional view we were able to take with this one-time brief report. That's where I would love to see this go, is we need so much more research and work on this to fully understand the implications of this phenomena.
I agree. Another important thing is, as scientists, we need to really, really make sure that we do not come across as arrogant, because that will reinforce the anti-establishment sentiment. That is probably there, and it will always be there. But there's something powerful about the idea that everything that they told you is wrong, and people who are in this in a professional role might be displaying power towards individuals who might have a different experience, and now they want to tell you their truth. So that narrative it has a lot of social validity. It makes sense in theory, and it really forces us to think about how we convey the knowledge that we have, how humble we are when we consider the complexity of the literature, and how do we convey the spirit of being humble, because really being a scientist is taking the time to really check things very carefully. So is in itself a process of challenging things, of not being excessively confident about things until you really go through all the steps that are necessary, and even then being open to the idea that what we currently know is subject to change. But we don't always convey that spirit, and we can come across as being a possible target for those who disagree with some of the conclusions that come from the evidence-based literature. And so that conversation and those challenges cannot be met with contempt. We do need to understand where do they come from, and engage productively, understanding what are the motivations of those who engage with that content, what are they learning, and how we counteract that in a way that is different from, well, of course, if you're a TikTok user, you don't understand science. The more we say those kind of things, the more TikTok users will feel empowered and confirm their bias.
All right. Any other parting words? Any advice for the newly minted? I know you guys work with lots of BCBAs, folks coming into your practice or clinic or what have you. How do you advise them if they're starting out on their career?
It's a great question. I think Giacomo and I are really fortunate. I mentioned this briefly at the beginning, but our clinic at Drexel is multidisciplinary, and the BCBAs on our team are really core to a lot of the work we do. Many of them are fresh out of school, like you're describing, or they're in school. A lot of them are getting their master's as we speak and doing ESDM or other intervention hours supervised with us. And I think I see a lot of myself. Now, I just realized, actually, last week I was on vacation and had breakfast with the mother of the then 2-year-old I first worked with when I was a junior in college and ready to go to grad school to help kids in some way. He's now 23. So more than half of my life, I've been working with kids on the spectrum. And I see a lot of myself as a young 20-something in these newly minted BCBAs or folks coming up that just really want to make a difference and really want to help people in some meaningful way. And there's an old proverb that I say to every single trainee I've ever worked with. And it's the idea that if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. And I think throughout my career, I've trained at some of the best autism clinics and centers in the country with really brilliant people. And I was in the right place at the right time to learn a lot of different approaches. And I think saying yes and being open-minded just to learning is the number one thing I always impart to trainees. And Giacomo's a great example of a colleague. We're constantly learning from each other. That's what drew me to Drexel, actually, was the opportunity to have so many really smart colleagues who also are humble and have that humility to know that there's a lot we don't know. So that's one thing, or many things, actually, I guess, that I try to impart to any and all clinicians or trainees I'm working with.
I agree. And the importance of understanding the context of our science. Obviously, the adoption of diagnostic or intervention protocols is not informed by science only. People do not make decisions on interventions that their child or that their center will adopt only based on the results of meta-analysis or other scientific papers. There are a lot of social determinants that will affect what is ultimately being implemented. And I think our role as scientists is to think about those too. We know that certain ways of assessing, diagnosing and certain intervention approach can be helpful. But when we talk about it, what are people actually hearing? How are our words interfacing with the words they heard on those platforms, for example? And how do we engage productively with those who might feel that they're in a safe enough space that they can share with us. Actually, what you just told me is different from what I heard on TikTok or somewhere else. When someone is sharing that, that's good. That means they feel that that's a safe space for having that kind of conversation. And then we can engage productively and talk about what are the goals of the things that we want to do and how it is a good fit potentially for your child, for your situation. If we create a space where families or people don't even feel safe bringing up that they heard something that is different from what we will do, then they might say yes to whatever we're saying, but they come back home and say, this is just like the video that I saw yesterday say, these people want me to do this, which is the exact thing I heard I should not do. So it's true that the establishment wants me to do that. So we need to avoid to perpetuate those narratives and just create a space where people feel that they're not going to be judged if they share whatever their current knowledge is, whatever that knowledge comes from.
What Giacomo said, I have one more parting thought that is so important to this audience that you reach, Matt. Actually, I went to ABAI International and presented in Dublin in the fall, and I was with some grad school colleagues, most of whom do single subject research. And the value of that research is so huge. And I think sometimes at our big INSAR or ABCT, other meetings, there's this divide in our field, even some psychologists who are also BCBAs, about how we're talking about the work we do and what the audience is and how it gets translated. And I was really struck because the data I was presenting in Dublin was based on the Ruby parent training. It was a group model design. Most of the talks I went to, though, it was not group designs. And I think I left that conference. I did so much kind of networking and catching up with grad school friends I hadn't seen in a long time, thinking about our field and this idea, what Giacomo just said, how are we communicating our science? And are we using kind of the shorthand and especially behavior analytic language at times that it's like, how am I digesting this? And what does this mean to me as a clinician or a parent or a person on the spectrum? And I think a lot about that because I think a lot of people, when I've worked with BCBAs throughout my career, they're like, oh, you're not a BCBA. So then they change how they talk to me as a psychologist. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. And I just think we need to be thoughtful and mindful of that. And it's funny, I do a lot of diagnostic assessment training. And last Friday, as I was wrapping the training, I gave a shout out. We had a ton of BCBAs in the room, some of whom were psychologists, some of whom weren't. And they said, someone put in the chat, finally some love for some BCBAs in assessment. And I was like, wait, what? How are you not feeling the love? Like, we need as many people out there qualified doing this work that we can find. So I think we have some work to do as a field to even be in the same room together. And we're all wanting the same thing. But I think we have a ways to go with that as well.
All right. Well, those are that's just some great advice and thoughts to leave us with. Congratulations on the paper and its popularity, its reach, and so on. I'm sure it's a surprise to everyone, but in retrospect, perhaps not so much because of the nature of the topic. I enjoyed reading it, and I'll certainly link it in the show notes and link the Drexel program as well. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you
for having us.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.